Okay, good afternoon, at least for those of you who are attending this webinar live in Japan and the rest of Asia. This is Takeo Hoshi. I'm the director of Tokyo College and also the moderator for today's webinar. Today's webinar will be entirely in English, but it comes with simultaneous translation as usual for Tokyo College webinars. So if you want to listen to the Japanese translation, please select Japanese in your using the interpreter button in your webinar application. Select Japanese or Nihongo in your Tsuyaku button. And many of you have attended Tokyo College webinar or other events before, but just in case this is the first time you're attending this first Tokyo College webinar, let me start by saying a few words on Tokyo College. Tokyo College was created within the University of Tokyo in 2019, so exactly 6 years ago, with the purpose of generating new knowledge to contribute to the creation of an inclusive society. And under the slogan, "Shaping the Future Together," we have been inviting distinguished scholars and intellectuals from various parts of the world and having them give webinars like this. Part of our activities, including these webinars, are supported by your generous support, generous donations. And before this webinar had started, you may have noticed that a standard-by screen has a QR code, which will take you to the place, the website where you can give donations to the Tokyo College. So if you missed that, we will show that screen again at the end of this webinar. So if you want to support us, you can just scan the QR code. And I hope you'll find our webinars valuable and useful enough, and hope you can continue supporting us. Now, today's speaker is Ambassador Alastair MORGAN, who has been Ushioda Fellow at the Tokyo College since 2021. He has done several webinars and lectures at Tokyo College, so he must be familiar to some of you. He has a distinguished career as a British diplomat and was stationed at British embassies in East Asia, including Japan and China. And he was also British ambassador to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, or that is North Korea, from 2015 to 2018. And Ambassador Morgan's talk today is titled "British Perceptions of China and Policy Towards Japan, 2010 to 2024. And it covers recent changes of British diplomacy toward East Asia. The period 2010 to 2024, of course, includes the time Mr. Morgan, Ambassador Morgan, served in embassies in Japan and China, and also his ambassadorship at North Korea. So I hope he can share his insight as an insider as much as possible today. And for the commentator, we have an ideal person. Ryo Sahashi is professor of international international relations and international economics at Institute for Advanced Studies on Asia, also known as Tobunken at the University of Tokyo. And after receiving a PhD in political science here at the University of Tokyo, and he was a faculty member at Kanagawa University. And then in 2019, he has returned to the University of Tokyo to join Tobunken. And I first met Ryo when he was a visiting scholar at Stanford University back in 2014 when I was there. So, and when Ryo moved from Kanagawa to Todai, I also moved from Stanford to Todai to become the colleague. So I'm really glad to have Ryo at Tokyo College today. So now I ask Ambassador Morgan to talk for about 40 to 45 minutes. And that will be followed by Professor Sahashi's comment for about 10 to 15 minutes. And for the audience of the webinar, as many of you know, you can write in your questions using the Q&A functions of the Zoom application. And you can do that during the talk. I will be watching Q&A during the talk and also during the discussion after the talk. I'll be watching Q&A on my screen and select good ones to share after the talk and comment. So let's start. Ambassador Morgan, please.
Well, Professor Hoshi, Director, thank you very much indeed for your introduction, but thank you also for tolerating my presence among such distinguished colleagues at Tokyo College. And I'm very grateful to you and to Professor Haneda, your predecessor as director, for your welcome here. And I'd like to thank all those at the college who have supported my activity here, including behind the scenes at this event. If I may, I'd like to add a word of thanks to Professor Aoi and colleagues at the Graduate School of Public Policy, GRASP, who invited me to lecture there on British diplomacy towards Asia. And the topic of some of my previous webinars, and indeed this webinar, has grown out of the lecture course that I gave there. As Professor Hoshi has said, I was serving in the British government with the British government as a diplomat in East Asia during the period that we're talking about, or some of it. But I am, of course, now retired. I'll be very happy to share any inside perceptions that I have, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the British government or indeed of any other organization. I'll speak about perceptions of China, but this is obviously a very broad topic, and I will restrict myself to British government perceptions of China over the period. It's not always possible to distinguish between perceptions and policy, and I'm afraid today I probably won't make that distinction quite as clearly as I should. But my aim is to talk about those perceptions and then the influence that British government views of China and relationship with China has had on policy towards Japan. After speaking about that, I will speak a little about what has happened since the 2010 to 2024 period. 2010 to 24 was covered by conservative-led government, coalition and then single-party conservative government. But from 2024, we've had a Labour government, and I'll take a look at what we've seen in the first 6 months of the Labour Party's governance and what that means for policy towards China and towards Japan. I will speak for no more than 45 minutes. If I can speak for less than 45 or even less than 40 minutes, I'll be pleased with myself. But I certainly shan't go beyond 45 minutes. Just to complete this summary, a professor called Kerry Brown recently wrote an excellent book about UK-China relations, looking over a 400-year perspective, which he called the Great Reversal. And the Great Reversal he speaks about is the change really since the 19th century in economic weight and power between China and the United Kingdom, with China now much the larger economy and with China having an influence in global affairs that the United Kingdom had in the 19th century. I'm going to speak about a lesser reversal, which is not the reversal in power between the UK and China, but the changes between 2010 and 2024. It's not a complete reversal of perception. in British government side, because I think at the beginning and at the end, you can find views that are reflected throughout. But there's a change really between a perception of China at the beginning of the period as an economic opportunity primarily, to a growing sense of security concern towards 2024. As for the relationship with Japan over that period, Japan has been a valued partner for the United Kingdom throughout. But within the relationship between the UK and Japan, there's been growing weight given to a defense and security relationship. And that has been in part a reaction to the rise of China and the rise of Chinese might and Chinese aggression or assertiveness, but there have been many other factors as well. And just the final word before I go on from the summary, in terms of Labour, there's a lot of continuity still between the Labour policy and the Conservative policy, but we have already seen a change in terms of the Labour government seeking to re-engage in a formal sense with China. And in terms of a relationship with Japan, alongside security and defense as before, perhaps a new emphasis once again on an economic relationship with a new framework, an economic 2+2 framework established. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So while my starting point is 2010, I'd like to look back very quickly to 2 or 3 points before that. The first is, and I will just mention this, China's entry into the WTO in 2001, which coming on top of the period that preceded it of reform and opening, was a major step in terms of Chinese involvement in the international order economically, and a great incentive towards globalization. We could talk about that more. The second point I want to mention as preceding the period is the agreement in 1984 that the UK reached with China over the return of Hong Kong to China in 1997, the joint declaration that was signed, settling the issue of the return of Hong Kong, changed the nature of the relationship between the UK and China so that the UK could focus on other issues in its relationship with China. Though one of the things we have seen over the period is that the issue of Hong Kong has far from gone away and has indeed troubled the relationship in a way that I think was not expected, and certainly that was not hoped for. At the very beginning of the period, just before the Conservative government came into power in 2010, the previous Labour government published a framework for engagement with China, which they published in 2009. And I mention this really because it is the starting point for the engagement of the Conservative Party and the perception of China at the beginning of the period we're going to talk about. It contains 3 pillars, which are, in brief, getting the best from China's growth for the UK, seeking to position the UK as a global hub for business, science and technology, education, and culture. Second pillar is fostering China's emergence as a responsible global player, dealing with international and global issues. And the third pillar is promoting sustainable development in internal development in China. And there are various assumptions underlying this, which are important for the area, the period we're going to consider. First is the significance of China's emergence and growth, which is expected to continue. The second is the assumption that that the UK can engage with China and through cooperation can accommodate China's rise and growth. And so an emphasis on accommodation and not confrontation. And this policy approach, which carries on into the start of the conservative-led governments, is shared really with the United States at the time and with the EU at the time. And of course, the UK as an EU member was instrumental in developing EU policy with other members of the European Union, as well as just accepting it. The United States had put forward the notion of China as developing into a responsible stakeholder. One other point about the start of the period was that in the British government's perception of security risk in East Asia at the start of the period, the perception was that the greatest threat was not from China's rise, but was from North Korea. And in 2009, North Korea carried out one of the 6 nuclear tests which it has conducted to date. So at the start of 2010, we see the British government, the new coalition, conservative-led government, looking at China fundamentally through an economic lens rather than fundamentally focused on security concerns. And this is something which was common in approach between not Britain and other leading European countries, France and Germany, among others. And over the period since 2010, the process that we've seen in the UK, where perceptions of security concerns have grown and the sense of economic opportunity has either diminished or been matched by a sense that there are security concerns in relation to economics as well, is a common feature of all those countries, though there are differences between them, particularly in the UK because of the legacy of Hong Kong. And you could point also to the consequences of the Brexit decision in 2016. And probably in the UK, one might see 2016, many scholars do, as the point in which the balance between economic opportunity and security concern starts to shift so that the security concerns start to predominate. But I will divide the period not into 2, but into 3, looking first at the conservative-led governments of under Prime Minister Cameron from 2010 to 2016. And then secondly, the government of Theresa May from 2016 to 2019. And then the third area, looking at the governments that followed under Prime Ministers Johnson, Truss, and Sunak. And at the start of the Cameron government, Prime Minister Cameron very much framed China as an opportunity. One of the things that changed over the period was the idea that it was possible for the government to speak of China in a single word, either opportunity or threat. And at the end of the period, there was a sense that it had to be much more nuanced and you had to look at different elements. But he saw China as an economic opportunity. But at the beginning, in approaching China, he also spoke about human rights and about the progress towards democracy within China. And there was a conception at the beginning of the period that economic liberalization, economic engagement would lead to internal developments in China, which would align China more closely with Western countries. And that was one of the things that disappeared in the period between 2010 and 2024. There was a break in the engagement with China by the Cameron government after Prime Minister Cameron and the Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg met the Dalai Lama, and the Chinese objected and put a diplomatic freeze on the United Kingdom. Not an economic freeze, but a diplomatic freeze. And that lasted for 18 months. And as a result of the endeavors of the British government to move on from that freeze and to re-engage with China, we saw a change in influence within the Conservative government, so that Chancellor George Osborne became the leading figure within the government. And those who were more cautious, like the Deputy Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, lost influence. And we moved into what became called the Golden Era. And in this period, there was a particular emphasis on economic opportunity, but not just a sense of China perceived as an economic opportunity, but from the Chancellor, the sense of China perceived as a necessity, that it was necessary for the UK to benefit from the rise of China, otherwise the UK would suffer. And this is a period when you could see something close to the UK bandwagoning, to use an international relations term, with China. This period involved inviting large levels of Chinese investment into the United Kingdom in critical national infrastructure, work with China on internationalization of the renminbi, the United Kingdom joining the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and other steps. And the period under Cameron and Osborne came to an abrupt end with the Brexit referendum, after which Cameron resigned and Osborne left the government as well, and Theresa May took over. I'll say a little bit more later about Brexit in relation to Japan. It made surprisingly little difference in terms of the relationship with China. The period under Theresa May can be seen as a sort of transition period where the language of the golden era is maintained and the relationship of engagement with China is maintained. The high-level dialogues which had been set up under Cameron in many areas, including the economic and financial dialogue, but a whole range of others continued. And Prime Minister May traveled to Beijing to meet Xi Jinping. But it was also a transition period because Prime Minister May started to introduce a higher level of concern about the security risk of Chinese investment in the UK, and conducted a number of reviews. And while those reviews didn't, in her time in government, lead to a change in policy on Chinese investment, they actually led to future developments which did change policy, and new legislation which was used to control investment in critical national infrastructure. Prime Minister May resigned because of her failure to get Brexit done, and was succeeded by Prime Minister Johnson, whose government eventually fell apart, leading to the premiership of Elizabeth Truss, Liz Truss, and then after her very brief period in office, the governments of Rishi Sunak. All three had very different perspectives on China, but during their time in office, we saw deterioration from 2019, particularly from 2020 onwards in the relationship. And this is really a rich field for discussion, and I hope we can come back and look at some of the issues. And I will just quickly run through some of the things that the British government perceived as changing in relation to China, or which led to the changes in perception. First was the COVID-19 pandemic, and this had a major influence on the level of engagement between the UK and China, but it also led to Chinese actions in relation to the World Health Organization and economic coercion against Australia that it led to negative perceptions. There were also questions raised about the origin of COVID, but I'll leave those aside. There was pressure on the British government from the United States to remove Chinese telecommunications equipment from the telecommunications network in the United Kingdom, which the UK initially resisted, but then had to accede to. And that reflects American views of China as much as British views. There was a move by the United Kingdom in 2020 also to step up its response to China's maritime claims in the South China Seas, making the point that these were not compatible with international law. There was a major deterioration in British government's perception of China's compliance with the joint declaration and the one country, two systems in Hong Kong. And I'll come back to that. But that was a major turning point in 2021. And at the same time, the British government sanctioned Chinese officials in relation to human rights issues in Xinjiang, and China imposed corresponding sanctions against British parliamentarians, which led to a sharp deterioration in the relationship. Moving forward, there was huge concern in 2022 about the no-limits partnership that China and Russia espoused at the time of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the whole-scale war launched by Russia in Ukraine. And this was another major turning point, with the perception of a growing alignment of Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, other authoritarian states, and a concern that while China was not providing military support to Russia, it was supporting the Russian narrative and providing dual-use support. There was huge concern over increased Chinese aggressiveness and military action linked to growing Chinese military capability, particularly in 2022 around the Taiwan Strait, and a growing concern that there might be that China might seek a military solution in relation to China and Taiwan, and had not disavowed doing so. There were steps taken by the United Kingdom to require China to disinvest from the nuclear sector, not entirely, but in terms of subsequent nuclear builds. And there were concerns about espionage, and particular cyber attacks. Very briefly, I will talk just about 3 sets of documents in which one can perceive the changes in perception. The best sources of documents, which I'm not going to talk about, are government speeches and parliamentary debates. But the 3 sets of documents I will talk about briefly are election manifestos, the 6 monthly reports to Parliament, which the British government and the Foreign Office submits, and the British government's national security and defence reviews. And the British government, there were general elections in the United Kingdom in 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019, and 2024. And the point I want to make about the Conservative government manifestos for these is really a very simple one, which is that with the exception of the last manifesto in 2024, the reference to China is very, very limited. There is hardly any reference to China in the manifestos, even up to 2019. And what reference there is tends to be in very restrained terms. And I think what this shows you, though it's an assumption, is that the Conservative Party, which was the party of government from 2010 onwards, did not see relations with China as an issue of great importance to the British public. So it was not really an electoral issue. So whatever within the China community, those policymakers and elites, if you want that term, who are involved in considering UK relations with China, it just wasn't seen as of great importance. And Kerry Brown, who I mentioned before, has made a similar point, saying that up until the COVID pandemic, the view of the British public towards China was fundamentally of deep indifference. But this changed with the pandemic, which affected everybody's daily life. And public opinion polls show that public indifference changed to hostility within the United Kingdom. And in the 2024 election manifesto that the Conservative government produced, there is extensive reference to China, but all in terms of threat and economic security, and nothing in terms of opportunity. And that, I think, shows changes in government perception of China, but also in the perception of this being an issue of importance to the Conservative Party. And questions about China were raised by party members in looking for successors to Johnson and Truss, but in terms of the general public. The second set of documents is the 6 monthly reports to Parliament on Hong Kong. And these are very instructive on one aspect of perceptions of China, which is whether China is perceived by the British government to be abiding by the commitment to give a large measure of autonomy to Hong Kong outside the area of defense and foreign policy, and respecting the separate economic and social system and the rights and freedoms of Hong Kong. And while there was a serious breach perceived by the British government in 2016 concerning Hong Kong, it wasn't really until 2020 that the British government decided or declared that that China was systemically failing to abide by those commitments. in particular, since China imposed on Hong Kong the national security law, which should have been formulated within Hong Kong, but was imposed from Beijing, and which has been seen by the British government as leading to an ending in autonomy, a repression, suppression of political freedom and of rights and values. I'm actually going to skip over the treatment of the national security reviews because I think if I spend too long on them, I will exceed my time limit. But I would draw your attention to growing emphasis on issues of concern from 2015 onwards, but all within a very cooperative framework. But the position changing in line with those events which I've already referred to in the integrated review that is published in 2021 and the integrated review refresh, which was published in 2023, which followed the Russian full-scale war in Ukraine. And the 2021 review still looks to taking advantage of economic opportunities with China, still perceives China as hugely important, more important than ever, and as a necessary partner in dealing with global issues, but now sets out China as the biggest state-based threat to the UK's economic security. And in the 2023 review, there is a reprisal of all the areas of concern, some of which I've already been over. And there is a new policy approach set out, which is protect our interests in the UK, align with partners. And I'm going to come on now to talk about the relationship with Japan, and engage with China when it's in the interests. Now, I'm hoping that Professor Sahashi will talk a little bit about Japan's perceptions of China, and also that we can discuss more UK-Japan relations. So I will do this rather more quickly than I have covered UK-China perceptions. But essentially, at the beginning of the period, Japan, the UK perceived that the relationship with Japan, not exclusively, but primarily in terms of the economic relationship. But China was, I beg your pardon, Japan was seen as an important partner because of aligned values and interests in terms of global institutions and membership of the G7 and so on. But ever since Margaret Thatcher had welcomed Japanese investment into the UK, and the UK had become the prime destination for Japanese investment in Europe, Japan had been invited by the UK to see the UK as its gateway to Europe. So the Brexit decision, which didn't lead to a change really in the perspective towards China, because we've got growing concerns about economic security, was a major issue in UK-Japan relations, which Japan and the UK successfully addressed through the CEPA agreement, the economic partnership, comprehensive economic partnership agreement that they reached. And Japan also was a major partner to the UK in welcoming British involvement in the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. And we can talk more about rules making, which was another step that was taken following Brexit. I'm going to do these just as bullet points. From 2012 onwards, the UK and Japan strengthened their defense and cooperation relationship. Culminating in a reciprocal access agreement signed in 2023. And I think my main point about these defense treaties that were signed is that they started in a period of when Britain regarded China as an opportunity. So it's not at all clear that this growing defense relationship was perceived by the United Kingdom, initially at least, as a response to concerns about China, but perhaps about concerns about the DPRK and other interests in closer alignment. And there are questions which I'd like to discuss about what it is that the UK and China, UK and Japan, I beg your pardon, think they can achieve in relation to China and otherwise through the defense relationship and defense cooperation. There are aspects of the defense cooperation relationship between the UK and Japan, which are of vital importance to the defense industries and defense capabilities of both, including the Global Combat Air Program. And this is a major program which is of global scope and is not just a response to China. I've given a lecture before about the free and open Indo-Pacific policy or framework put forward by Japan and adopted by the UK. And I think this is an extremely important aspect of the UK-Japan relationship, and setting the idea that working together as middle powers with other middle powers, they can set an environment which stops any single power coercing other powers in the region. I won't talk about Britain's support for Japan on the permanent, as a permanent member of the UN. We can come back to that. It's been a long-standing position. There's growing cooperation between the UK and Japan within the G7. And that's an important forum which Japan and the UK helped to revive after the COVID pandemic. I haven't done that justice, but I look forward to further discussion. Turning quickly to labor and China and Japan, we're still awaiting key documents from the Labour government in relation to its China policy. Labour will publish an audit of the relationship, and it will publish a defense review, which will show how far it is affordable for the UK to engage in the Indo-Pacific region. The Labour has a new slogan, which is challenge, compete, and cooperate, to set out its framework approach towards China. And it's interesting that challenge comes first. We're not seeing a return to the golden era, but we are seeing, as I mentioned before, a concerted effort to re-engage in terms of summit-level meetings and the relaunch of economic and framework financial dialogue with China and other meetings. In terms of the Labour Party's policy towards Japan, there's a huge continuation of the very close partnership that was established during the Conservative government period, including a reaffirmation of the Global Combat Air Program, which at one time it looked as if Labour might not have the money for, but that's committed to, and the Hiroshima Accord, which was signed in 2023, which really set out the nature of the partnership. As I mentioned, the Labour government, when Prime Minister Starmer met Prime Minister Ushioda, they announced a new economic 2+2 framework. And we can look into why they may have done that. I think that is trying to reposition the economic relationship back in terms of primacy alongside the defense and cooperation relationship, but also with economic security in there. But it's also, I think, a reflection of the incoming Trump administration and the economic pressures that that will impose in relation to tariff policy, as well as the continuing issue of Chinese economic coercion, so that British and Japanese cooperation in this sphere, where they have very, very common values and approaches in terms of sustaining a rules-based international order, becomes increasingly important. I think we are going to need in our discussion and looking forward to talk more about the influence of UK on UK policy, of US policy, and what this holds for the future, not just in economic terms, but in terms of the war in Ukraine, where the Russian action led to the affirmation by Japan, the UK, and other Western countries that security in the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic were indivisible. And is this going to stand up to a second Trump era? Are the global institutions, which have been important for managing China's rise and for sustaining a rules-based international order, are they going to stand up on the economic side with the World Trade Organization, but key organizations like the World Health Organization and the whole operation of the United Nations? I think the main influence on British policy towards China in the conservative era was not actually US policy, though it was a major influence. It wasn't actually British personalities. The change in leadership at different times did make a difference, and different influence between those who espoused a security agenda and those with an economic perspective among officials made a difference. I think the major change was China's growing assertiveness, China's growing power, and its actions. And there may have been understandable reasons for those actions, but it was those actions which led to the change in the perspective of towards China, from being at the start of a period an opportunity, a rising power that could be accommodated, to a view that as well as an opportunity, there was threat, there was economic threat, certainly, even if not declared military threat. There was a need to confront as well as to cooperate to protect UK interests. And there was a limit to the engagement that was actually going to take place, even though the British government didn't disavow engagement. Whether those will be the same drivers for perceptions of China and UK-Japan relations in the second Trump administration period, we can discuss. But I will finish there, and thank you very much for your patience and your time.
Thank you, Ambassador Morgan. And let's go to Professor Sahashi next.
So thank you very much, first of all, to Tokyo College for inviting me again to very important events. And thank you very much, Director Hoshi. and also my colleagues in the Tokyo College for making it happen. And I also very thankful and want to say congratulations for Ambassador Morgan for having a really comprehensive, insightful, and well-prepared remarks. And it really helped us to understand the dramatic shift in the UK-China policy, which really interests us a lot over past 15 years. I think now it is very timely to talk about this topic because not only seeing a lot of new signaling message remarks from the second Trump administration, but also as Ambassador Morgan said, we have now the new Labour government in London. So while UK-Japan relations have developed during this period, this 15 years, this evolution, the UK-Japan relations, undoubtedly influenced to some extent by the changes in UK-China relations. Of course, as Ambassador Morgan pointed out, UK and maybe also Japan has its own reason to make closer relationship in its bilateral friendshipness and historical legacy. But at the same time, we shouldn't miss the big picture. The China in the room really made us closer last 15 years. Japan has seen its perception very deteriorated over past 15 years. Especially in its security policy, China has come to view it as more strategically significant challenge than North Korea, leading to a shift and comprehensive policy response. In Japan's security policy, China has come to be regarded as a more strategically significant challenge, leading to rapid policy responses, especially as we can see from Kishida administration. At such a juncture, the United Kingdom has emerged as a key global partner for Japan, but also as a very important regional security partner. From our perspective, Japan considers the United Kingdom a very key security partner with a global impact, playing a vital role in Japan's broader diplomatic and security strategy. Its contribution extends beyond regional security and to promoting global stability and international order building. The UK's role in initiatives such as Hiroshima Accord, joint fighter aircraft development, and Japan's effort for British access to CPTPP exemplifies its significance as strategic partner. So from Japan's perspective, the United Kingdom is now recognized as its most important and closest partner, at least in Europe. Conversely, might Japan also be the United Kingdom's closest ally in Asia, outside the Commonwealth? I'm not sure about this. And as Ambassador Morgan said, the establishment of economic 2+2, a dialogue between the two nations, is underway, just publicized recently. A further deepening UK-Japan cooperation. Moving forward, bilateral collaboration between two countries should extend beyond practical project-based initiative. Maybe we can dream, UK and Japan as an upper middle powers must consider and will consider how to reconstruct the international orders in the era of Trump 2.0. As Ambassador Morgan explained about the change of British perception on China, I briefly mentioned about Japan's perception shift on China last 15 years. I prepared some remarks, but just because of time constraint, just let me summarize this. After listening to Ambassador Morgan's presentation, I found out very big difference between two nations. We, Japan, shifted our perception on China last 15 years mainly by security reasons, right? We are very security oriented, right? So we still have debate. So which year we start to deteriorate our perception on China? Some people say 2008 because the PLA Navy, People Liberation Army's Navy, actually passed our Tsushima Strait and also Miyako Strait, and also they had more activity around the Senkaku area. In 2010 and 12, as you know, we had incidents over Senkaku Islands, our territory. So it depends, so people has different idea from when, we really start to shift our perception and also our policy responses to China. But, security-oriented reasons are very important for us, right? Before that, we had a lot of issues like, food issue, nationalism issue, but these issues never changed the very basic of Japan-China relations. But security issue really changed, kind of the, the basement of our perception on China. But I think, at least what you explained is United Kingdom for UK, especially UK people, the many things changed after the COVID-19, maybe also Hong Kong, but both are mostly political problems, right? For us, because, we can say, we are neighbor to China. So, maybe, Japan has more interest in securing our own vital security interest. But for me, the UK shift has been influenced so much by political reason. So this could be a little bit difference between two nations, and it could be concerns maybe in the future. But just let me point out such a difference. Of course, I try to exaggerate the difference between two nations. Of course, we have a big interest and a negative response to Chinese activities in BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, and Chinese behavior in international system. But we are mostly security driven. So I just want to shed light on such a difference. Okay, let me pose some question. But mostly my question is, how should we view the labor China policy? We have a lot of interest on that. And, I just want to remind the audience, the Labor government has warmed up the relationship with China already, right? Prime Minister met with a Chinese top leader already in the G20. And also Wang Yi, a foreign minister, visited UK in February. Before that, actually, the UK and China has a really good economic and financial dialogue in Beijing in January. So my first question is, will the United Kingdom maintain a strong normative stance on China, including human rights issue, that Europe has traditionally upheld? Additionally, how will the UK's approach align with or diverge from the broader European reaction to China? I believe some European nations still try to maintain firm critical stance against China from such a normative stance. But how about UK? Could the UK keep such a normative stance or to be more pragmatic engagement with China? As I said, the recent joint statement from January, UK-China Economic and Financial Dialogue is particularly intriguing. It contains nearly 70 items, reminding a little bit lengthy G7 communique, but really long communique between two nations. And there, actually, the United Kingdom treated China as a very important partner for international economic and financial order. I was so much surprised how long and how deep they agree over the documentation. So my concern is, will UK keep its alarmed eyes on Chinese behavior in international society? We are fine. Every country are fine to engage with China for reasonable, kind of the reasonable reason. But I think, for me, it's start to look like, too much, to give up some position against the Chinese behavior. My second question is, what will become the UK relationship with the United States? To think about that, I just want to introduce one very interesting article by Christy Lake, director of ICDS in Lithuania. She recently categorized European response to Trump into 4 categories by her article to foreign policy. Enthusiastic, very enthusiastic to Trump, like, some leader like in Hungary. Second category is engagers, try to engage, China, like Poland. And third category is moralist. And fourth category is opportunist. Moralist approach might be, like a German chancellor, and the opportunist approach might be a French president. Where will UK be fitted into 4 categories? So Labour government want to engage with Trump as much as possible, or want to behave like a moralist, opportunist? I'm not sure. But, we really want to know, because, in Japan, we always think about the international politics from kind of, triangular political perspective. I mean, US and China, right? So what we really want to know is what kind of distance you want to keep between 2 superpowers. And the third question is, actually, it is finally about Japan, the future of Japan-UK relationship. But from our perspective, our biggest question is, will UK continue to champion the liberal international order? Right? So this point overlaps with my first point. Under the Biden administration, Prime Minister Johnson agreed to a new Atlantic Charter with Biden. I think to think about for the future of transatlantic order, but also global order, we really have to think countries like US, UK, and Japan must take a leading role to underpin the international order or orders, right? But now in the Trump era, we cannot expect a lot to Trump anyway, regardless of our stance to Trump administration. It is very difficult to imagine Trump will say, oh, we will be a champion of international order. It is something beyond my imagination. But how about UK? UK really want to underpin the international order, after the, a Second World War, like a free trade, human rights, and others. So this is, the very important question. But I think, now, with the Labour government, we start to feel the UK start to make a closer stance to China, but at the same time want to align with Japan still. This is a little bit difficult situation for us, right? We really want to see UK behave like, not like 2024, but at least, after 2016, as you explained. But for me, the Labour government might go back to the phase 1, as you say. I mean, the year from 2010 to 2016. But at least we want to see UK as 2016. As finally, I want to remind the audience, the year was the Prime Minister we really deepen our relationship with UK is Theresa May, not Johnson, May. With Prime Minister May, we really deepen our relationship and started our global partnership. But I think, let me just emphasize again, my worry is Labour government might go back more than 2016. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Well, if you're all right with it, Professor Hoshi,
yes.
Shall I respond to some of those points? Or
yes, I will start by letting you respond to that point, but let me summarize what Professor Sahashi said. So he ended with three questions or four questions? Three questions, three questions, right? The first one was, will UK maintain a strong normative stance against China? So that's the first point. And the second point is about the UK's relation to US, how to deal with US. There are several possibilities we see in the international reactions to the new presidency in the US. And the third one is, will UK try to be a leader of establishing a new world order? And there are actually several Q&A are coming in from the audience, which are related to these three questions. So let me start by reading some of those. The first related to the second question on the UK's reaction to the US. One listener says, continental Europe, such as France, is trying to distance itself from the US, aiming to strategic autonomy. Does the UK have similar ideas, or will the UK continue to have close relation with the US based on the special relationship, in quotation, with the US? So that relates to, I think, the second question of Professor Sahashi. And related to the third question of Professor Sahashi, considering the shifts in Japan's security policy, do you believe in a new configuration, including Japan? So this listener is talking about the new international order, including Japan, Britain, and other European countries, assessing more autonomy from the US in terms of defense and political incentives. If yes, what types of configurations, and more specifically, in what sub-regions, if any? If not, how do we work on keeping rule-based order without the US participation and confronting China? So please, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. And just to go back to some of the points you made about the earlier period, I think 2009 was also, or is viewed by some scholars as a turning point in European perceptions of China risk, if you like, and security concern. But I do think that in the UK, it's really 2016, and that it's notable that in 2009, the UK signaled that North Korea was the greater concern and security in the region, and not China, because of, say, the incursions into the Senkaku area. I think that the change in British policy is, or perspective and policy, is very much security focused as well as political, but security concerns economic security as well as military threat. Obviously, we're in a different area, but we're certainly concerned about the threats that would arise in relation to Taiwan as well. I'm sure that Japan is, as the British government has said, one of its closest strategic partners in the world. And if you leave aside Commonwealth countries, or if you leave aside Australia, in the Asia-Pacific area. In terms of the question about values or the normative approach, there was perception that after Cameron met the Dalai Lama and he came under pressure, that the UK moved away from a normative approach, that human rights were downgraded in interaction with China. That was never the avowed position of the British government, but it was perceived that they were raised in a sort of very gentle way. I don't expect the Labour government to abandon interest in human rights, and I think that the pressure that it will face from different communities within Parliament and elsewhere to look at human rights issues and security issues, both from those within government too, like the security agencies who are very focused on that, is going to be enormous. I don't believe that we are seeing strictly a return to 2010. The Chancellor states that it's not a return to the golden era, but she says that partly to make it awkward for the Conservative opposition by reminding them that there was, under their Conservative government, a golden era and their policy changed so much. But I'm sure it is intended to maintain the different elements, and that's what we've seen so far. In terms of relations with the United States, the Labour government doesn't naturally have an easy relationship with President Trump and his brand of Republicans, but I'm pretty sure that that Starmer will continue to try to stay close to the United States as far as possible, and not to criticize the United States publicly where it can avoid it. But you've already seen the British government taking a different position on Ukraine, for instance, from the Trump position. And I think if things go wrong, then you may see greater distance growing. And Starmer has said that he doesn't feel that he is forced to choose, and he is trying to build up the relationship with European countries as well, have a better relationship with the institutions of the European Union, which we actually saw being restored in the later part of the Conservative period as well, because of the war in Ukraine, but also the European member states. Though how far Europe can go in strengthening its defense industries and its alliances remains to be seen. Just as there may have been different Japanese and British perceptions of China risk or challenge or threat, so there were in relation to Russia, where for quite a time Japan didn't take such an acute view of Russia as the UK. But with the war in Ukraine, we came much more closely together. I'm sure that if it can, the UK will seek to support a rules-based international order and the institutions of the international order, including by resisting actions by China within the institutions which call them into question. But it's very difficult, for instance, to make the Security Council function when you have total polarization between Russia, China, and the rest. And how much Japan and the UK can really do to shore up a rules-based order against challenges from East and West, if you like, I'm not so sure.
Okay. Thank you. Before you respond, let me take one more question, which is one more question from the audience, which is related to your conversation, and that is about Russia policy or the policy against Russia. And this listener says the UK and Japan share similar perspectives, not only on China policy, but also on Russia policy. And the question is that to enhance deterrence against China and Russia, does the United Kingdom seek an expansion of the RAA? I'm not familiar with what it stands for, so you can explain that to me as well as some audience, or an upgrade from a partner nation to an allied nation.
So the Reciprocal Access Agreement, or RAA, is the agreement which allows really for interoperability in exercising and is linked to the question of self-defense, Japan's assessment of self-defense. I'm not close enough to British policy to know exactly what Britain will seek, but one of the things that the previous government said that it was seeking was for Japan to treat Britain in terms of mutual self-defense, should there be joint exercising together, say, as it has done with, I think, Australia, but with the United States. I'm not. I question how far joint exercising and military cooperation can deter, but it certainly adds an area of uncertainty. And we're seeing continuing deployment, joint exercising and deployment of a carrier strike group, for instance, under Labour, initiated by the Conservatives. So I expect that to continue. I've now lost track slightly of your question, but we'll stop there.
Okay. Liu, you have some responses.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. And, actually, as a commentator, I try to exaggerate my points always. So actually, I really don't have a super big worries about, Labour China policy and Labour's foreign policy. But still, I think, we really want to see what will come this year. Because reportedly, Prime Minister Starmer is going to Beijing, China, this year to hold a summit meeting. And what will come out from the summit meeting? And how can we, like Japan and other countries, be secured for British intention and partnership with China? Of course, at the same time, I strongly believe, UK foreign policy will be very cooperative with us, Japan, for example, to underpin the, very fragmented international orders and institutions, especially in the time of Trump 2.0. But, we really want to be secured the British intention, in the time of Starmer's visit to Beijing. And also, as the final point is, as Ambassador said, between UK and Japan, we really need to have more tangible, substantial outcomes, in international society, right? Of course, UK already joined CPTPP, but maybe, we can do more. I don't know. I still don't know what we can do together, right? But UK Japan plus alpha might be a really good. Maybe we can invite like Australia, Canada, and other countries. Maybe based on some agenda. But it is very important for us to cooperate and to start to discuss even from track 1.5 or 2, right? If not, it is very difficult for Japan, actually, to find out good partner to talk about the international order, right? Of course, we have really good regional partner, countries like Australia, Korea, and others. But as I said in the very beginning of my comments, UK is not only regional partner, but also global partners, real global partner, who really we want to talk for global, institutions. Right? So I think we really shouldn't miss this opportunity. in the time of crisis of international society, to deepen our vision for the future of international orders. So thank you very much, but actually very encouraging comments I received from your response. So thank you very much for that. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor.
So Leo, you mentioned CPTPP, and there is a question from the audience about CPTPP, or the role of CPTPP in the UK, or the role of UK and the role of Japan in CPTPP. And this listener says, the Britain left EU, but joined CPTPP. And what does it mean? Would it be possible, would there be a possibility for UK to join RCEP, which is a regional trade agreement within Japan, within the Asia, which involves both Japan and China, but I would say a somewhat looser trade agreement than TPP. But what do you think? So I guess this is for both of you. Possibility of a UK joining RCEP.
Well, to go back to CPTPP,
yes.
I think from a British perspective, the fact that the Japanese government under Prime Minister Abe rescued CPTPP or created CPTPP after the US withdrawal from TPP was a matter of great importance in terms of Japan taking a lead in creating an institution with the highest standards in relation to international trade and trade openness. Britain joining CPTPP cannot, I think, from the perspective of Japan, be a substitute for the United States being in CPTPP, but the United States is not going to be in CPTPP in the organization. So having Britain as a global partner out of region commit to it, I think was important for the initiative. The economic consequences of CPTPP for the UK are more limited than, for instance, the membership of the European Union by a very, very long way. But they do open up, for instance, freer trade with Malaysia, for one. But I think it is a signal of the commitment to looking globally and to high standards and trying to preserve international trade. I think the comments that the previous British government has made about RCEP or RCEP have been quite lukewarm, and so I don't know. I don't know if there's been a change in thought, but I've not been expecting it to happen. Joining RCEP.
All of these trade agreements are complicated.
Yeah,
and,
I mean,
Japan has now FTA with EU.
Yes.
And would there be a possibility of UK rejoining EU or establishing something with EU? Or...
Yeah, of course not. But I think I think from UK perspective, it is what is the merit to join the RCEP? I'm still puzzled about this question because as the audience and the question, the audience who made this question know very well. RCEP is not TPP. RCEP is just more low-hanging fruits. So of course for UK, the political incentive might prevail and might be interested to join the RCEP for some points. But I think if they really want to have more tangible negotiation with Asian big economies, maybe they may want to have a different, ideas, not joining the RCEP. So, but and can I make just another point?
Yes.
Yeah, coming back to the point of how can two countries cooperate towards the international governance, global governance and international orders building. I think now it is very important for two countries, and maybe even for other G7 countries. We really have to finance international organizations and also many projects in developing nations, right? United States will be really, negative and very reluctant to pay money to international organizations and also many projects in developing nations. We really have to, sustain what we have done after the war. I mean, after the 1945. If not, of course, we should talk about the big things, big picture. But actually, what we really have to do might be, starting from financing, what U.S. Decided not to do. So, we really need to make such a discussion also.
Right. Obviously, everything comes back to money in many ways, and the budgetary position in the UK is extremely constrained. When the United States previously pulled out of the WHO, the British government lent into it and it actually increased funding for the World Health Organization. But the capacity for the British government to increase international funding, to step in, say, where the US aid has gone, is very, very limited, I think. Just in terms of the UK's relationship with the EU, I think there is no prospect of the UK rejoining the internal market or the common customs area. There is discussion of possible relationships that might lead to greater trade openness with the EU. Whether they will happen, I don't know. There's also been some discussion or speculation about whether the EU might be interested in alignment with CPTPP. But I personally don't expect that to happen. But if the EU were to become a member of CPTPP, that would have great benefits for the United Kingdom. But I think it's entirely fanciful.
Well, thank you very much for active discussion and a very insightful discussion on the role of the UK and Japan in re-establishing rule-based international order or trying to maintain the rule-based international order. And I think the roles of two countries are clear, although both countries are fiscally challenged. So the money question. Thank you very much, Ambassador Morgan and Professor Sahashi, on very insightful comments, and also the audience who sent us very good questions. Thank you very much.